Like, that didn't work as well as I had hoped. So it's going to be slightly here, right? And this is, I think this is slightly larger than what my heart would be. So what you are going to be quizzed on next Thursday is this one singular page that says heart anatomy. I am not giving you a quiz on all of like the arteries and veins. The arteries and veins are going to be on your midterm. I cannot stop that typhoon from hitting. But what I'm quizzing you on is the heart. Okay? So today we are going to go over the heart anatomy page. So you guys remember from Anatomy 1 when they made you memorize all of those lovely little cavities of your body and that kind of thing? Yes. The cavity in the middle of your thoracic is called your mediastinum. This thing on your heart anatomy page. Right? So the cavity that your heart sits in is called the mediastinum. Specifically, it has its own little shell, or not shell, but like tissue covering in its own little cavity called the pericardial cavity. So your heart has a thin, tiny little sac around it called the pericardial sac, and the space between that sac and your heart, where fluid is and that keeps it all nice and hydrated and healthy, is your pericardial cavity. The apex of your heart is the tip of your heart, down at the bottom. So remember when we were talking about your SA and AV nodes going off, and when your AV node goes off, the signal goes down the middle of your heart and then hits the apex and kind of goes back up the outside? This is the apex of your heart. So the bottom tip of it is the apex. But your heart doesn't just sit straight up and down like this. It's leaned over to the side and slightly to the left. Okay? So the base of your heart is like the back edge of the heart, kind of like where I'm putting my thumb and holding it. So if you're looking at like an x-ray of yourself, and you see your heart kind of just happily sitting here on top of your diaphragm and liver, it's sitting on the base of it. The tip is the apex, but your heart sits on the base of itself. That's why the two are different things, because your heart does not go like, your heart is not perfectly heart-shaped straight up and down. It's slightly askew. Okay? So you guys have to know the layers of the heart as well. The pericardium is that outer cavity that you guys have to know. Right? Your pericardium is a slight layer around your heart. Okay? Epicardium is the outside of your heart. If I am going to poke the outside of this muscle, I am poking the epicardium. Just like the outer layer of your skin is your epidermis, and if you ever want to freak out like a high schooler or something, go up to them and whisper to them that their epidermis is showing, and they will freak out for a while because they won't know that it's skin. Right? Epi is outside, so this is your epicardium. All the muscles that are on the inside is your myocardium. So the inner muscular layer is your myocardium. Myo and muscle both start with the same thing. So this is all the muscle on the inside of your heart. On this one particular model that is labeled as B. I don't know why it has B written there instead of a number. There you go. The endocardium is the inner lining of all of the inner chambers of the heart. So the endocardium is this inner lining and layer. So all of this inside layers, this is your endocardium. Are we good with those first two branches? Okay. So we have left and right ventricles next. and left and right atria next. For ventricle side of things, your interventricular septum is this middle big thick muscle layer here that separates your two ventricles. So this is your interventricular septum.
So,
yes.
I thought you just said show me the myocardium again?
Myocardium is all of the muscle.
All the little outside.
Right. It's
Okay.
the middle muscle part of your heart. So your interventricular septum is made of myocardium. But this specific part here is your interventricular septum. Inter, if you ever see words that start with the word inter. Inter is the Greek prefix for between. So if you get on a highway and it is the interstate, like 75, interstates are highways that go between states. So 75 goes from Florida to Georgia to Tennessee, right? It's the highway that goes between states, so it's an interstate. This is your interventricles, interventricular. And a septum is something that separates things. So like this is also called a septum. It separates your nasal, like your two nasals. I'm double checking two of these before I tell you where they are. The trabeculae carnae that are on the list for the ventricles. Because I'm double checking the anterior, I'm going to double check the anterior posterior interventricular sulcus and the coronary sulcus because I don't want to get those two things wrong or confused for y'all. The trabeculae carnae, which is the next thing on the list down. See how the inside of your ventricles is not smooth and it's kind of all folded up so it can expand and contract? So you have like layers of folds on the inside of this ventricle in there. The names of those folds is your trabecular carnae. So all of these little bitty folds here are called trabeculae carnae. Papillary muscles are the itty bitty little muscles that connect to your heartstrings. So all of the itty bitty little papillae muscles that are covering the trabeculae carnae that connect to these valves via the heartstrings, those are called papillary muscles. So these papillary muscles, unless you see something that is specifically pointing to like right here on the model and they ask you for clarification or a question about like where do these heartstrings what do these heartstrings connect to, that's a papillary muscle, but for the most part they're super tiny. The pulmonary trunk is right here. This is the pulmonary trunk coming out of your right ventricle, and then once it has branched, it is called your pulmonary arteries. You guys may need to know on the artery side of the list that there is a left pulmonary artery and a right pulmonary artery because one goes to the left lung and the other one goes to the right lung. For your heart quiz, you don't need to know that. You need to know that this is the trunk when everything is connected and that the pulmonary arteries are what happens after it splits. So trunk and then arteries. The aorta is the really big artery that's coming out of your left ventricle right here, that's super big and thick. This is your happy aorta. And it starts to have a bunch of branches off of it, but this is your aorta. I'm going to double check. I'm going to double check which sulcus is which before I tell you wrong by accident.
Yeah, I never could find anything.
on those?
It's on 452 in the lab book.
452.
I think it's 17.5.
Did I look at it 500 times and didn't see it?
Okay, so those are going to be like trick questions. I can't sugarcoat that. I know what they've done. Okay. Do you guys remember from A&P1 what the folds in your brain are called?
Sulci.
Gyri and sulci, right? So the gyri and sulci of your brain, you had like the little humps of the folds of your brain, and those were the gyri, and the sulci were the little valleys between the gyri. A sulcus in your body is just an indentation of where something else goes. Like it's a little valley. So when they are asking you questions like where is the coronary sulcus and the posterior and inferior interventricular sulcus, right? The indentions, like the little canals where these arteries sit. So like this is the coronary artery that's on your list, and we were about to get there after I went through the atria, right? So this one is your coronary artery. The indention in the heart, where the coronary artery happily sits, is the coronary sulcus. Does that make sense? It's like they named both the river that flows and the riverbed, if that helps with an analogy. So your coronary artery, like you guys can find your coronary artery pretty easily. The coronary sulcus is where that coronary artery happily sits.
So is that something you can see on the model right there?
No.
Okay, so
That would be one of those weird questions on the midterm where if they point to it, they'll be like, what's this artery? What does this artery sit in? Right, so like you'll have one that's like label this vein or this artery, and then the other one will be a question of in what does this artery or vein lie? Your posterior and anterior interventricular sulcus are the sulci that, like, this is the anterior view of your heart. It's the front of your heart because that's what anterior means. The sulcus is what this is sitting in.
so like number 12 on that. I don't know if it's gonna be a hot model. That would be it.
Yeah. Well, depends upon how they phrase it on this model. On this model, that could be your anterior interventricular artery. If they ask you what that artery is sitting in, then it would be the anterior interventricular sulcus. And then if I flip your heart over to the back of it, this is the posterior side of your heart. So this would be where your posterior interventricular artery is, and it sits in the posterior interventricular sulcus. I think that covers the ventricles. Okay, so your atria are next. An auricle is a covering of something or an outer flap. This is an auricle in your body, like this part of your ear that you can like pinch and see, and many people get multiple piercings in. This is your auditory auricle. Your heart has auricles too. The outer covering and outer flap layers of your atria here are called auricles. So when I'm opening up this atria, I'm literally holding the auricle in my hand. That's what this piece is. Like, I'm removing the outer auricle so we can see the atria. Because the atrium is the chamber. This is the covering of the chamber or the auricle. You do have an auricle on the left side and the right side. So I can like pull both of them off. let's see. Is this the one that has the, okay. Pectinate muscles are the muscles that are around your heart, that are not actually part of your heart, right? They are these muscles that are around your auricles. There is something called a fossa ovalis. Adults do not have a fossa ovalis, so that is not found on all of the models. Some children with heart defects do, though, or when your heart is still forming and you're looking at something like in utero. The fossa ovalis is literally the paint that they have put here on this model, and the little indentation that is a small oval hole right here. So if you are asked about a heart defect, that is like the oval hole on the inside of an atria, that is a fossa ovalis, because fossa means hole and ovalis is like a little oval. Adults normally have that grown shut. We don't normally have to worry about that. Small tiny babies and children though might. Your right atrium is where everything gets dumped, right? The superior vena cava is the top vein. So that is the top vein. Inferior vena cava is the big vein that goes down the bottom. So your vena cava are the two veins that dump into your right atrium. Superior means above, so it's the top one. Inferior means below, so it's the bottom one. Your coronary sinus. Right? Coronary sinus is the one that goes around the atria on the outside. Okay. Like this area right around here where these veins and arteries go.
So what's the difference between that and coronary sulcus?
Coronary sulcus is where the artery is. The coronary sinus is where the vein is. Yep, someone got super nitpicky when they named all of this.
Yay.
But coronary sinus is the little indentation where the coronary vein goes. Pulmonary veins. These are the veins. Actually, they're in the back here. There we go. The veins that are leading out or leading back to the left atria. So these two double sets of red veins here at the top are your pulmonary veins, because this is, your left atria is taking blood back from the lungs. So it's oxygenated, and you have one set of these veins coming in from the left lung and the other set of veins coming in from the right lung. So that's right here. You can remove the top of this if you want to. So your ductus arteriosus and like ligamentum arteriosum, that is this white ligament here that kind of holds your aorta to your pulmonary artery so things don't fall out of place. You have a tiny itty bitty little ligament here that is white, playing kind of peekaboo on this big model. That is what the ductus arteriosus or ligamentum arteriosum is. And I will accept either one of those two things. Like if you see stuff on this lab list that is name/name, I will accept either of those two names that you write down and remember. Yes. It's this tiny itty bitty ligament that holds your aorta up against your pulmonary arteries. So everything stays like nice and neat in this one bundle right here. Now I'm going to put the outside back together. skipping the coronary circulation really fast because I already had it open, why not? Y'all should know your 4 valves by now, right? Those are the last 4 things down at the bottom. The mitral valve is your bicuspid valve, and it's the one on the left side. So your mitral valve is right here. It is also called a bicuspid valve. Okay. The tricuspid is the one on the right side. Aortic valve is the one that connects to your aorta from your left ventricle. And the pulmonary semilunar valve is the one that connects from the right ventricle into your pulmonary artery. So y'all have 2 arterioventricular valves. That would be your tricuspid on the right side and mitral valve on the left. And then from the left ventricle, you have the aortic valve. And from the right ventricle going into your pulmonary trunk, you have the semilunar pulmonary valve. And now we get into the coronary supply. Okay. So your coronary circulation, because your heart has its own set of circulation. Coming, like if your heart is sitting here, coming from your aorta, you have 2 branches. You have one branch coming out of your aorta going around here to the left, and one branch that kind of ducks behind your pulmonary artery and comes out of your aorta and goes around to the right. Those are your left and right coronary arteries, because those are the first branches of coronary arteries. Think about those like highways. Okay? On the anterior side, this is where your left coronary artery came into play. When your left coronary artery branches off and you get this one big artery going down the middle of the front of your heart, that is the anterior interventricular artery. On the flip side of things, on the back, your right coronary artery also branched off and went down the middle here of the back of your heart. This is your posterior interventricular artery. The circumflex artery is the one that loops around underneath, like it's the one that nice happy loops around underneath this atria. So you got right coronary artery until they start calling it the circumflex artery because it's looping around an atria. And then it kind of like branches off into that posterior interventricular one. If you look at, so you guys can see the one that goes down the middle, that's the interventricular one. The artery that is to the right of that. So, let's see this, it kind of double branches. That second double branch that is not the interventricular artery is the right marginal artery. So you have multiple branches of these. They all branch like tree branches and trunks. Okay. The other one is the right marginal artery. The big ones that run down the middle are the interventricular ones. The one that is next to that one is the right marginal artery. Coronary sinus, we've already touched on what that one was. And then coming back into your heart and dumping back into your right atrium, you have major veins. And fortunately, these ones were named easy, right? Because you have the middle cardiac vein, the small cardiac vein, and the great cardiac vein. The thickest one you see on any of the models here is the great cardiac vein. It's always going to be the thickest one. Okay. So this is your thickest one. This is your great cardiac vein. Okay. The middle cardiac vein is the one that's in the middle. And then this smaller, thinner vein is the small cardiac vein. For once, they did not get creative when they named the veins. And that's your heart. Do y'all have any questions about that?
Back over those last two, the middle and small.
Hmm?
You go back over those last two, the middle and small.
Yeah, the great, middle, and small? Okay. Okay, your great cardiac vein is the big one right here. It's the biggest one. The smallest one is actually wrapped around on this side. It's this small itty bitty one that's almost on the side of your heart. The one that is in the middle of the two is the middle cardiac vein. So the big, thick, fat one that is like the first vein you're going to see is the great cardiac vein. The one in the middle is the middle cardiac vein. And then this tiny itty bitty thin one that's kind of like just going down the base, like the side of your heart, that is the small cardiac vein. They came up with a bunch of different names for other veins in your body, but for your heart, they were just straightforward and simple.